Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is the rise in AP testing. But first, let's meet our special guest, Rob Franek.
A national expert on colleges and higher education, Rob Franek is a publisher, editor, lecturer, media contributor, and author, as well as a former college admissions administrator. As editor-in-chief at the Princeton Review, he oversees the company's 150-plus Princeton Review books. He earned his BA at Drew University and serves on its board of trustees. Prior to joining the Princeton Review in 1999, he was a college admissions administrator at Wagner College for 6 years. Welcome.
Excellent. Amy, Mike, thank you so very much for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Rob, we are looking forward to this conversation too. The topic that we have selected is of paramount importance. But before we dive into it, we've been looking forward to having you on the show for a long time, Rob. You have such a long history in education and publishing. Love for you to share some of the highlights.
Oh, sure. And I appreciate the opportunity. I've been working at Princeton Review. I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud. 25 years as of August 2024.
Well, it's only funny, Rob, because, I started at Princeton Review in January of 1994. They launched my career in the industry. So, of course, I'm like, I preceded you in my local Cleveland, little itty bitty Cleveland market.
And I'm a Kaplan guy, so back in the day where there were only two houses, I was the opposing house.
Oh, Montagues and Capulets.
This is right.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, I did start as a Princeton Review teacher for the SAT. I went to a little school in New Jersey called Drew University, and I was a SAT tutor. And I hadn't thought about the Princeton Review after I graduated for a few years, working college admissions. I got this job at this wonderful school, Wagner College on Staten Island, little school, kind of like Drew, but in one of the five boroughs of New York City. And I sold it like the land of Canaan, let me tell you. And it was awesome. And they gave me a car and put me on the road. And I had this real crash course in admissions. And I was there for almost 6 years. I was in grad school at the time. And then I saw an ad in the Chronicle, which was a paper edition at the time, that said that Princeton Review was looking for someone to lead their publishing division, which was, I want to say 14 or 15 books at the time. It was relatively small.
Yeah.
And the first thing that you had to have for the criteria, I remember this clear as day, that you had to have 5 or 6 years college admission experience. And I'm like, I'm starting my 6th year at Wagner. And then the second thing you had to have was a sense of humor. I'm like, I love these guys. And checkbox. And so I applied. I got an interview with John Katzman, who started the company. And but before I came in there, how you were assigned like an upperclassman when you were an underclassman when you were first coming to orientation. Well, my orientation leader, my big brother at the time, was called Drew. His name was Reed Talada, worked for Princeton Review, shared an office with John. And John says, "Do you know this guy, Rob Franek from Drew?" And Reed says, "You're stupid if you don't hire him." They brought me in. I got the interview. I got the job that day. And now 25 years later, I'm still sitting here. So it
was obviously a perfect match.
Yeah.
I talk about students finding fit in schools and in college and universities. And I'm like, I tell this to my husband, I'm like, I have totally found the best fit for me in a career, because I continue to meet, in my mind, I call it the Holy Trinity: college-bound students, their parents, and counselors helping them along the way, let alone all of the admission brass and university administrators and so on. And it's just a delight. I continue to be a student of higher ed in the different verticals that we navigate in at Princeton Review.
100%. I think that's part of the fun about being in this sort of sphere, right, of college admissions is we all know, right, it's always evolving, always changing, always something to learn, but at the same time, kind of at a pivotal point for kids, right? Like that we get to share information that launches them into the future, which I think is a really exciting sort of place to be, right?
Oh, I am right there with Amy, 1,000%. The idea of giving students the vernacular, but then the confidence to have this conversation. That's why I was so just delighted when you asked me to be a guest on the show. That idea of instilling that ability to have a conversation of substance. with your parents, with counselors, with your peers, with folks like us. To me, that's a family conversation and a counseling community conversation. And I'm just delighted to be here and launch into it.
Yeah, it feels very much like a privilege to be able to be a resource at an important inflection point.
So
Well
it's kind
said.
of
Well said.
interesting because we've all been in this sort of test prep world. Certainly at Princeton Review, that's what we think of when we think of Princeton Review. And we've been around long enough. That's kind of interesting, I'm sure, with your experience within publishing, the fact that APs, right? Testing and test prep used to be you think about SAT, ACT prep. Now, obviously, I'm assuming the sort of the library shelf of Princeton review books has grown dramatically, and obviously due in part to the fact that AP testing is a really big deal, and obviously preparation for that is a big deal. Can you share a little bit with us, kind of what's going on or what's inspired this recent increase in AP tests and AP testing?
And I so appreciate the question, Amy. And I to answer your question at the beginning, we do publish many AP titles. We have 20 different disciplines that we create AP text, and some of them will have a regular edition, some will have a deluxe edition, a premium edition, with a few more practice tests, and the content is the same. But it is such a huge part of a high school student's life. And now, over the last couple of months, we've really been digging into what I would think is the College Board, who creates obviously all things SAT, but all things AP as well. Uh, just the changes that have happened. And I think the fulfillment of this strategy that they created mid 1950s when the first AP exam was given in 1955, and they had comfortable and significant growth through the year 2000. But Amy, Mike, unbelievable growth since 2000 up to current day. And to me, that is certainly strategic. And whether I'm a fan of the College Board or not doesn't matter. But the truth is, I appreciate the ability to have that kind of reach and to have that ability for students to have great utility in their AP tests and to use it from an admission perspective, which I know we're going to hit on as we move forward. But this is a strategic move.
Yeah, I didn't realize how big or important APs were until COVID. They
Oh
immediately
yeah.
cancel the SAT, like boom. But man, they were all over APs. Like we are not like this piece of real estate was not going to be let go.
That was
And
definitely the
right, it
sign that
was like a
things
big
had
signal.
changed in terms of where College Board's priorities were.
Right.
Oh, 1,000%. I'm so glad that you brought up COVID, and that to me it's so not ancient history when we think about just standardized testing. It was near impossible in 2020 to take an SAT, let alone an ACT. But you know, uh, AP tests went on, not without a hitch, as we all know.
Sure, sure.
33-hour test turning into a 45-minute incarnation, completely open book at your home. But there was a lot of revenue running on the table. When we think about it, the College Board, at least current day, uh, is making a little shy of $500 million
It's
on
insane.
AP testing alone. They're shy of $300 million on the SAT. So when we think about it, and I tell this to my own students at the Princeton Review, College Board is an AP company. It has SAT testing, no question about it, but it's an AP company. That is where the majority of its revenue comes from.
And most people don't think of it that way. To what do you attribute the fact that we don't have a national curriculum? To the space that College Board identified and said that, there's such fragmentation in education at every single level, but they've introduced these programs starting with major subjects and branching out into more esoteric areas
Yeah.
with the full cooperation of high school teachers.
I hear you. And this is the thing. I think you're certainly asking the right question. Like when we think about a national curriculum and just the vacuum that is there, College Board has filled in that gap and continues to fill it in, as you so nicely put it. But to me, that strategy continues to grow. We now have pre-AP courses for ninth and 10th graders, which provide no exam, certainly no college credit, but it is an on-ramp, and at least my anecdotal opinion, to an AP class and ultimately an AP test in full. And when we think about this, and I was leading a conversation for the New Jersey ACAC back in November, just professional development event, but it was a well attended. And what we talked about was just this pressure that it does put on high schools from just an administration and operation perspective. And those students, those teachers aren't completely reimbursed for that offer that they are making to students when it comes to AP testing, and this is going to continue to grow. So I'm thinking about it from an operation perspective as well as from the value to students.
The other funny thing is how, and this is really prior to the latest iteration of the SAT, but I found it fascinating when College Board on the PSATs started like recommending or sort of making reference to like, oh, this kid is AP ready. This kid like making recommendations, which clearly was trying to push more kids into the AP market via like taking the PSAT, let's say as a sophomore or now even as a freshman, right?
Yep. It's so true. And listen, if I were the head of College Board, would I be making the same recommendations for students when I think about the value of AP later on from a college admission perspective? I think I would. And when we think about, and we've all been teaching to the SAT for a long time. Clinton administration for me teaching how to take the SAT, and I long to tell my students, and I'm sure you do the same thing, that the SAT doesn't test you on how smart you are; it tests you on how well you take
Oh,
the
right.
SAT.
That's
Right?
actually
That's
how
the
you launch
mantra.
all your YouTube
Yeah, right.
videos. Now you reminded me, Rob. That's what you
I feel
say.
like I've heard you say that
Oh,
before,
Yeah,
Rob.
Rob. I've heard that quite a few
A billion
times.
people on the planet have as well. Yes. Yeah, but I believe this stuff. I mean, the truth that is true. But now when we look at AP tests, now this is about subject matter expertise, and all of this deep knowledge from a discipline centric perspective that students get to flex their muscles in a way. Standardized tests, of course, but in a far different, and I would argue a more elegant way than the SAT or ACT ever could.
So do you think that, so here's the real question, right? Mike and I are test prep, sort of professionals here.
Yeah,
Do you think
Sort of
AP
professionals,
tests,
Amy?
we're professionals, Mike? Yeah.
It's sort of
pros.
professional.
You're
That's
at
my,
the AP
we're test
level.
prep
Yeah.
professional, right? I can say that. So the question really becomes, will AP tests start to replace the need for an SAT and ACT admissions considerations? Like we certainly thought that in COVID, right? With SATs or ACTs being canceled and the APs remaining. I mean, there's no question that a lot of us said, well, we need to pivot to start doing more AP preparation with students because that looks like the future of College Board and certainly potentially of admissions.
I'm so grateful that you brought this question, Amy. It is the trillion question. The answer right now is, well, obviously, no admission teams have made that tectonic shift to replace AP as a requirement and jettison SAT or ACT. That said, when we start to think about those schools that are test flexible, we can look at, I'm only a couple of blocks from NYU. They have long had a test flexible policy, but and now Yale, right? They're one of the relatively new schools that have now introduced, but it's still representing 3% of all schools in the country are test flexible, which means just to get the nomenclature right, students must submit a standardized test. If you choose not to submit the SAT or ACT, then you may submit the next best thing, which for most students is going to be an AP exam. But for many schools, there are caveats, right? For NYU, you have to have at least 3 AP exams. So I think the rise of AP testing and most of those tests have to be taken certainly by the end of your junior year because you want to use it for your college admission application. So just the population has not only grown of AP test takers, but it has shifted the population away from taking 12th grade into lower years, younger years, pardon.
This path seems fraught with peril, right?
Yeah.
You get the question of, if APs were considered a proxy, would all APs serve? Is the AP French exam as representative as the AP Chem exam? Right? I mean, like that's one major one right there. And I can't imagine that even the most test flexible school would consider all APs equally. But then again, it might beg the question, why not?
Well, I was going to harken back to something we're all aware of, which were the subject tests, right? I sort of have suspected that the subject tests got got bounced because they were not a revenue generator. They were going down. But think about it now, the AP tests now can serve that purpose, right? Because and so back in subject test days, you would have that idea of which subject tests were more important than others, right? Like you needed to do the SAT
Yeah.
writing or maybe a math or the idea sometimes I think was there were some that were preferred or more likely that a student would take. But now with so many offerings, and to be fair, so many schools might limit, you can only take 3 APs in a year or something like that. You do have to think about like strategically, are there some APs that sort of, are better than others?
Oh gosh, yeah. Is it separate but equal? Is it yeah? I mean,
I mean,
you both are
right?
bringing up the right questions. No, I totally hear you. I totally hear you. And you know, just thinking about subject tests, and I'll just speak very quickly about the last year that the year that they you know, sunset, let's say, the SAT subject test, which I think was in January 2021 or
That
20,
sounds
21.
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, but more people, more students took the AP biology test that year than they had all 20 of the SAT subject tests
That's
combined.
That's
tremendous.
Isn't
Right.
crazy.
that
I mean, that's
crazy?
that's huge. That's huge, right?
And it didn't happen in one year. You know, like I was in college, but it was the death knell for these tests for a long time. But finally, when they made a decision, and now again, you're thinking about where are those students going to go? Of course, they're going to go to AP testing. But you're right that schools have not made that decision yet to say, okay, we're also requiring this number of AP tests. Now, it can be the reason that you're discussing, separate but equal or not. But I think about it also from just an access perspective, access equity. When we think about it, these are expensive tests. Even if you can demonstrate financial need to the College Board, you're only going to get, you ready for it, a $37 discount
Oh,
for a student. So
yeah.
from a $99 exam to 37 bucks, and students are taking multiple of these tests. We know this. Not every student has access to the same number of AP tests at every school.
Well,
So
that's the dilemma
yeah,
from an
yeah,
equity perspective, because you have obviously under-resourced schools that couldn't offer an AP in certain enough areas. That is, I think, where you kind of can't really say that one AP test would be better than another. And certainly, if you have students who want to demonstrate sort of acumen in like the social studies, then they're going to go all in a bunch of those versus, yes, I want to show the STEM, so I'm going to do math and science. So it's tricky to say that some could be better than others for sure.
Yeah, and I think the access issue is worse than that because there's a difference between an AP class and an AP exam, right? We're conflating them in our conversation. But, traditionally students take the full AP US history, APUSH. They take the APUSH
yeah,
class
yeah.
and that culminates with the AP US history exam. But you can certainly sit for the AP US History exam without having taken the class. But it's hard to do that. It's much harder to take the class, to take the test if you don't attend a school that's hosting it. It's, have either
Yeah.
of you ever had students who couldn't find a seat for one of these AP exams? Because I've seen it happen a lot.
Of
Yeah.
course, yeah, yeah. Some schools are just right there. Again, thinking of it from the operations and the administrative perspective, totally hear you. That many students are not able to get in at another school or find a seat. Pardon me, at that school, and some schools are just limiting them overall. Just having to them for their population. So, as you're noting, Mike, these roadblocks for many students are a real entity. So to answer your question at the beginning, do I see this happening in the next couple of years? I mean, until we solve this, I cannot see that this is going to happen right away. That doesn't diminish the value of AP testing from an admission perspective, and I know we're going to talk about that, but replacing the SAT or ACT, it's going to be difficult unless they solve those problems.
So yeah, and we didn't even get into IB programs, but let's speak to, while we're on the topic of admissions, what is the current value of AP exams? My understanding is that in the application process, students can self-report AP scores, but they're not requested
Yeah.
during the admissions process itself. So what do we see as best practices for students signaling their excellence in this regard?
Oh gosh, I mean, for me, any additional fodder that we can give admission teams that is going to underscore this one thing, and I'm going to just say this out loud. We do a lot of surveying, as you both know, of college-bound students. We do a lot of surveying of college students, a little over 300,000 of them a year. But then we also survey college administrators, right? And I write a book called The Best 390 Colleges. And in midsummer of each year, I do a survey of essentially deans and directors of admission. And I ask them all sorts of questions. What happened with affirmative action now that we're a year out? What's going to happen with your SAT and ACT requirements? Are you going to be test optional? But we asked specifically about AP tests, and the value of them was significant, right? Over 60% of them said they would value AP testing. But when we think about that, we understand that it underscores class rigor, right? And we know that even though the value of the SAT or ACT are still paramount in my mind, it is class rigor that trumps them all, right? And most AP tests, or most, AP classes are going to be the most rigorous that your school offers. The handful of schools that do IB or French back or something like that. But the truth is, most schools are going to have their most competitive curriculum, and that's going to be AP, and that's what schools want to see. Those are just the facts. This isn't a spin on it. This isn't hyperbolic in any way. This is just the fact.
Makes perfect sense.
There is the dilemma, though, when you say rigor, and I know I don't want to. We don't want to go down this road, but is with CCP classes, right? Like students who have to choose between, do I do dual enrollment or do I do AP? And I know that's a whole other conversation, but it is in the rigor conversation a dilemma for students trying to choose. And I often would say the distinction is, if you're looking at more selective institutions, you got to pick the APs, right? Now, if you're looking for credit, and let's say you're looking to save money, graduate early, well, then CCPs or dual enrollment is probably your best choice. But that's a whole other conversation.
It is, but a lot of students and parents ask us. I'm you both know this, but I'm on the road almost during the academic year. I did 107 events last year in 2024. I will certainly dwarf that in 25. But this question, Amy, comes up all the time. What is the choice if I'm making this choice between AP and a dual enrollment program at a local college, community college or otherwise? Where's the value here? And we know that there's a value from an admission perspective for those schools. Anyway, we can go down.
But it doesn't seem to be hitting or cutting into. I mean, how much is it cut into the AP rise, right? It seems like AP is still rising despite the fact that we know dual enrollment exists, right?
It is, my friend. That is the takeaway. And I feel the same way about IB. International Baccalaureate, French back. I mean, this is still a relative handful of schools that offer these things, whereas AP, and Mike, I think you were noting this before, this idea of a national curriculum. College Board is calling AP now the AP program. And I think it is, again, nomenclature, yes, but filling in that gap.
Absolutely. They've been doing it all along, and they should feel free to assert that space, because
it's kind of been stealth, though, right? Is it kind of a stealth approach? Like, we're just sort of slowly
they've been doing it, and finally they're turning around and saying, yeah, we're here. We are that.
You wake up one day and you're like, it is all AP.
Yeah. Maybe we're just exactly. It is all AP. It works.
The Trojan horse, guys.
Great plan. All right, we have time for one more question, and I'm gonna ask you, and hot takes are welcome here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the AP? You already mentioned how the first versions of digital AP exams were ramshackle, to say the least, right? They were hastily thrown together, but they served a purpose. But now that the digital SAT is administered through Blue Book and everybody has Blue Book on their devices, what will AP exams look like on Blue Book? And should we be excited about this, or are we going to see some kind of diminishment in evaluation?
And I so appreciate this question, Mike. I do think we're going to see. Oh no, I think it's going to be a value to students. When I talk to my own students, I mean, they're all digital natives. We all know this stuff. They're certainly comfortable on the new digital version of the SAT using the Blue Book app. College Board was very clear at the beginning when they first announced in 2022, in January of 22, that the SAT was going digital. They said, listen, AP is on the roadmap. And this is just, again, the fulfillment of that. Now, it kind of, they were just going to do 9 of the exams were going to be on the digital, the digital platform, the Blue Book app, come May of 25. But all the shenanigans that happened last summer, that turned into nearly all of them, right? So it's 16 tests going fully digital. Then there's a bunch of hybrid ones, and then there are ones that are Language-based or foreign languages and some like visual arts and visual arts that are still pencil and paper. But do I think it's going to continue to go fully digital? Absolutely. Will it be valuable for students? I think it could be, just because this is where those students are going, and they're more comfortable likely taking tests in that regard.
There's nothing you've seen that gives you pause. Everything seems smooth. I mean, by all means, the digital rollout of the SAT was smooth.
Yeah.
Much more effective than I think anybody anticipated. And it came out, and Blue Book seems to work really well. So it should be good, right?
Yeah, I think from a student perspective, Mike, it is good. There is value. There are value. This is a valuable platform, and that will ultimately benefit students taking the test in the testing environment and then for admission, as we discussed. Now, I do think, just to keep in mind, that the College Board is offering more of these APs during the testing day during school, right? So maybe that's answering the access and equity question, but it also is building it into the curriculum. So I don't want to be Pollyannish about all of this stuff, but we know that College Board continues to grab market share of students. We know that that student base is growing. The number of schools that are offering APs are growing, and we understand that digital is the environment these students are going to take the tests in, but they're happening more during the school day rather than on weekends, and that is going to be something to watch.
Yeah, that makes sense. While you were talking, I thought about one issue that I might be concerned with, and simply the fact that the digital tests don't handle long passages well, and that might impact certain subject matters.
Yeah, and I think, and you're right to bring it up, because those tests that are hybrid are those tests that would require some longer passages. And I believe, listen, I mean, just to give College Board some props here, this is a knowable and navigable system. I believe that this is where students are going to go, and I suspect they're going to figure it out for those hybrid, the current hybrid tests that are going to come out in May.
That's fantastic. Listen, Rob, we could definitely talk with you all day. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
This is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the conversation. Appreciate it.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, email is always best. Robert.Franek, that's Franek @review.com.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.